Welcome to the IMEO MENA Mix July podcast. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting discussion. My name is Hesham Youssef. I'm a retired Egyptian diplomat. I've been working on conflicts in the Middle East for the last 4 decades or so. I was a senior official at the Arab League, at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I also was a senior fellow at the United States Institute of Peace, and then more recently joined the European Institute of Peace to deal with a number of conflicts in the region. And with me is Nimrod Novik, who will be introducing himself, and then we will talk about all kinds of things. Nimrod, you have the floor.
Hi, Hesham, and thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Nimrod Novik. I'm a veteran of the Israeli diplomatic corps as well, not as much as Hesham. I spent about a decade as the chief advisor on policy to Prime Minister Shimon Peres. Before that, in academia, University of Pennsylvania, Tel Aviv University, strategic studies. In the wake of that, I've been involved in track 2 diplomacy for the past several decades, with vast contact in the region and beyond. Today, I'm affiliated with 3 entities, all of them dedicated to the same cause, which is resolving the Israeli-Palestinian context in a regional, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a regional context. The veteran one of which we established as soon as we left the Prime Minister's office, is called Economic Cooperation Foundation, which you probably didn't hear about because we operate under the radars. The second one is Commanders for Israel Security, which is a group, the largest Israeli group of retired generals and senior diplomats dedicated to that cause. And the third one is an American Jewish organization, Israel Policy Forum, which is also dedicated to the same cause.
Well, thank you very much, Nimrod. It's a pleasure to be with you. We're going to discuss all kinds of issues. We'll focus on the situation in Gaza and achieving a ceasefire in Gaza, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank, also the situation in Israel internally. And going beyond Israel-Palestine, we'll talk about Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and perhaps also the relations between Israel and the countries in the region, and in particular, Egypt and Jordan. And let me start by Gaza. Nimrod, in the last almost 2 years, 22 months, there has been all kinds of attempts to achieve a ceasefire. I myself, on many occasions, felt that it was closer than it really was. And every time we thought that we had a ceasefire agreement close, it turns out to be not that close. Now, my question to you is, in light of what happened in the last few days in relation to Israel asking its negotiators to go back, the US also pulling its negotiators back, what is your expectation about the prospects of having a ceasefire anytime soon?
Well, mixed emotions. Part of it is a result of like you, I'm a victim of failed hopes repeatedly, but also because of the current setting. One thing that I never learned at the university, nor did I teach at the university, is the significance of synchronization. What we have today is an opportunity on the Israeli side and less so on the Hamas side. And without trying to equate the two, one terrorist organization and one is my motherland, if you don't synchronize both, you're not going to have a ceasefire. And let me say a few words on each. On the Israeli side, things look better not because anything has changed, except for the fact that our Knesset went into a long summer recess. Our court system went into a long summer recess. And therefore, our prime minister, who's been driven primarily by domestic political considerations in prolonging the war beyond its justified and purposeful phase, was internal dynamics and his court situation. Now he has some more bandwidth and political room to maneuver. And I think that the coincidence of the two pauses, Knesset and court, create an opportunity. I think it is significant that today we just heard that the American envoy Witkoff is on his way to Jerusalem, which indicates two things. One, that the administration in Washington has reached the conclusion that it's time to get it over with. And two, that they believe that the hurdle is primarily in Jerusalem, and you've got to uncork the political situation in Jerusalem if you want to get to a ceasefire. Given that, optimism that stems from troubling considerations, I mean, just to think that my prime minister, conducts a war on the basis of considerations that have nothing to do with national security is bad enough. But the fact that I think that there is an opportunity now for a ceasefire to be declared in Jerusalem because of these settings. The trouble I see is mostly with Hamas, given its eroding internal communications and decision mechanisms. Hamas outside in Doha and Hamas inside in Gaza have had problems communicating throughout the 22 months of the war. But with the decapitating of the Hamas leadership inside Gaza, those who filled the vacuum are far less powerful to impose their will, and maybe far less aware of broader considerations beyond what's happening in the tunnel where they're hiding right now. So I hope that the court in Jerusalem will be released, but I worry whether this will be complemented by enough pressure on Hamas to go for the deal.
Well, I didn't expect that we will differ that early in our discussion, Nimrod. So let me tell you that I think that the problem is more on the Israeli side than it is on the Hamas side. Because, Israel is, as you mentioned, you have an Israeli prime minister and the cabinet that is working not necessarily focusing on the national interests of Israel, but focusing on continuing in power. And this, I think, is part of the bigger problem. And secondly, Hamas already reached a ceasefire agreement in January, and the war was resumed. And I don't think it was resumed because there was a violation by Hamas of the ceasefire that was reached in January. So
I'm trying to find out, where do we disagree?
We disagree that you were talking about synchronization and the importance of
No. Sorry, Hesham. I started by saying that my side was not pursuing a ceasefire in good faith.
Okay.
And I concluded that circumstances have changed, not because something happened in Gaza or a new government was elected in Jerusalem, but because the prime minister has some more freedom to maneuver because of the Knesset recess.
Sure. But then on the Hamas side, I think Hamas is much more flexible than it has ever been, because it knows that it has no options. People are dying. There is a very dire situation. And all what they were trying to achieve is something very close, or as close as they can get to what they were able to achieve in January. But they couldn't. So this is why I think the situation has become much more difficult. But let me ask you, do you think the question of mass displacement will continue to be something that will cause headache to everybody around the region by Israel insisting that, as far as it is concerned, the solution is to depopulate Gaza and to ensure that mass displacement takes place?
Let's make a distinction between two things that are bad enough in and of itself. Each of them is bad enough. Displacement in the sense of moving population inside Gaza is bad enough. Ethnic cleansing of the strip by expelling them out of Gaza is a different one. So let me start with the easy one. Ethnic cleansing outside of Gaza is not going to happen. Yes, there are voices, even not just in the Israeli Knesset, but also lunatics in the cabinet itself that speak in those terms. But this is not the Israeli policy. And I would even venture to tell you that if that was the instruction, the IDF would not abide. We are a democratic society, and the IDF is under the government, but it is subject to the law, and this is an illegal instruction. Now, the internal displacement is bad enough, and it was part of the strategy of the government as it instructed the IDF. But I think that two things are not going to happen that are in the news. One, as I said, is ethnic cleansing, and the other one is the so-called humanitarian camp or encampment of 600,000 Gazans in the southern east of Gaza. You know, yesterday there was a meeting in the Knesset where the lunatics were running high on we are ready to do it and we're already making plans and so on. And the IDF representative says the IDF has no plans to go there.
And in relation to the humanitarian situation, there has been all kinds of accusations by Israel that Hamas is stealing humanitarian assistance. And of course, people are starving in Gaza, as you well know, and even President Trump himself acknowledged that there are people starving. You know, whether it becomes declared as a famine or not is a technical issue, and it may take some time. But the question is, do you think that as a result of the current developments that we are undergoing, that the situation on the humanitarian front would be somewhat better?
Let me start by saying that I am embarrassed to my core for the situation, the humanitarian situation or the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Gaza. And even though I assign much of the blame for Hamas, not only for triggering the atrocities of October 7th and everything that ensued, but also for the way it treated the population and contributed to prolonging the war. But nonetheless, it is our responsibility. Once we occupy a territory, we are responsible for the civilian population, and that's why I'm so ashamed of what's going on. What I think is happening, three developments I think are triggering a change. One is the situation on the ground became untenable. Second, the international community started to move from empty expressions of concerns to actual steps to tell Israel, you got to stop it or else. And third, for some reason, the Israeli media stopped censoring itself and started to show Israelis what the world has been seeing all along, but Israelis have not. The convergence of all three produced a tremendous pressure on the prime minister. And thanks to the two pauses that I pointed out at the outset, the Knesset recess and the court recess, the prime minister had the freedom to make a change. And on Saturday, he convened an emergency session of the cabinet and he did it on Saturday so that most of the lunatics who are observed the Sabbath will not be there, and instructed to open up Gaza for everything that Israel prohibited previously in terms of the amount and the venues of supplying humanitarian assistance.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there are people in Israel that feel ashamed that this is happening. Are you equally ashamed about what's happening in the West Bank in relation to settler violence, in relation to settlement activities, annexation plans, the motion in the Knesset calling for annexation and so on? And do you think that the situation can be moved to a less escalatory situation, or do you think that the things will get worse before they get better?
Well, I will make a distinction between being ashamed and embarrassed on certain issues and being worried on others. Yeah, I'm ashamed of what, it's not in the same category, it's not the same league, but I am ashamed of Jewish settlers, extreme settlers terrorizing innocent Palestinians day in, day out. It is hardly reported outside of Israel, very little reported inside of Israel. I took the trouble of writing what for me is a major piece that I published on Thursday in Time, and you can find it online. I call it the violent Gazaification of the West Bank, in which I describe and analyze and suggest what has to happen about it. Yeah, I'm very much worried about it. I think that what we have is a situation where extreme settlers, very violent ones, and radicalized Palestinians are feeding on each other and using each other as an excuse for violence, and in the process, killing innocents, destroying property, and threatening a major conflagration.
You mentioned a little time ago that you feel that Prime Minister Netanyahu has a breathing space as a result of what's happening in the breaks in the Knesset and in the court. What are the prospects of having early elections in Israel? This issue has been coming up and down the last few months, and there were expectations the government may fall, no, it will not fall, the coalition, and etc. Do you think that this is something that you expect to happen, or do you think that the elections will take place in the time that it is supposed to take place in November of next year?
Let me link this to the ceasefire that we were discussing before. The ceasefire formula speaks about a 60-day ceasefire, during which discussions will go on about end of war, or what some people prefer to call permanent ceasefire. Let me tell you something, my reading of Netanyahu. I think among his unique skills is making a decision only at the last minute and knowing better than most when the last minute is. I don't think that he has decided whether he goes for early elections or whether there is a benefit for him to delay them. If he goes for early elections, he has to break to the center because his current standing in the public is unelectable. He has to broaden his base. And for that, he needs a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, and a complete change of attitude, all hostages coming back, breaking with his more extreme elements and turning to the center, knowing that in election wake, the extremists will have nowhere else to go but to him if he so chooses. I think that he will grind water, assuming we have a ceasefire of 60 days. He will grind water on negotiating the end of war and make his decision at the last minute, so to speak, on day 59, whether he decides to resume the war, stick with the lunatics, and delay the elections to the last moment as prescribed by law, or whether he goes for a complete ceasefire and early elections.
That's a complicated situation. Let me go to the peace process and the prospects of peace. In light of all what we have been talking about, whether it's in Gaza, the West Bank, the government in Israel, and so on, and we're talking after the United Nations had a meeting that was described by the United States as a publicity stunt, in which maybe the vast majority of the countries in the world participated, and many at the very high levels, including a large number of foreign ministers, where a number of important declarations took place and so on. And we have had discussions before on all kinds of issues pertaining to what should happen next. And whether the ball is in the Israeli court or in the Palestinian court or in the Arab court and so on. And I have always maintained that the ball is in the Israeli court. And you sometimes thought that, no, maybe it's elsewhere. Do you, in light of what's happening in Gaza, the West Bank, and so on, do you still think that the ball is outside the Israeli court, or is it in the Israeli court?
There's no doubt in my mind that the ball is in Israeli court. This has been the case since 2002, when the Saudi Peace Initiative, later becoming Arab Peace Initiative, of which you were involved, came to light, and Israel never responded to it. And it's becoming even more relevant today. And it's becoming relevant because there's a realization that the two parties on their own are unable to resolve the conflict, and they need help. In the past, the help was only from the US. Today, there is a realization that there is a major role for the region, for the peace and stability-oriented players in the region can play, and that they can help the Palestinians, and the US will help Israel to nudge the two parties in the direction of a settlement. Now, I believe that the ball is in Israeli courts because we are the occupier. We are by far the most powerful player. And therefore, the responsibility is ours. But there is one more reason why I believe that the ball is in our courts, and that is because I'm an Israeli. And my expectations are first and foremost from my government. And I want my government to do what's right for our people. And what's right for our people is to separate from the Palestinians into a two states living in peace side by side. So I don't absolve the Palestinian side of a host of errors and missed opportunities over the decades, but that doesn't help me. I mean, blame game is no solution. So yeah, I believe that what happened in New York, I think it was yesterday, that the statement that came out of it is a very important one. I don't share the administration dismissing it as just as a stunt. The real test of the conveners, which is the Saudis and the French, as well as all the others, is the follow-up. But let me make one final thing that you heard from me before, and I'm just not willing to give up on. The document that came out of that, and I advise all our audience to read it carefully, covers everything from an Israeli parochial perspective. It covers everything Israelis should hear in order to support a peace process. But a document in New York is not an effective way of communicating with Israelis. And that's why I hope that Arab leaders, first and foremost, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as Mohammed bin Zayed, as well as President Sisi and King Abdullah and the King of Morocco, will launch a major campaign to talk to Israelis in our living rooms and turn that document into their talking points, showing Israelis what the region is willing to do, what is the promise of regional integration, why security will be enhanced by a two-state solution. And I believe that if they do that in time, before elections are called, you cannot do it during an election period because that's interference. But if you do it in time, I think Israelis who are fascinated by the young leaders of the Arab world will be listening.
Nimrod, well, I have a problem, because my problem is that what is happening now in Israel is that you have an Israeli establishment that is bent on liquidating the Palestinian question. So the question is not that it is something minor that we differ on. The question is that with the current establishment, and it's not about Netanyahu only, it is much bigger than Netanyahu. And the question is that they want to make sure. You know, you're talking about annexation of parts of Gaza, controlling the whole Gaza Strip, and annexation in the West Bank, and kicking Palestinians out, whether it's kicking Palestinians out of Gaza or kicking Palestinians out of the West Bank. You know, reaching out to all kinds of countries around the world and saying, well, how many Palestinians can you take? And then going to the US and saying, well, there are people who are willing to listen, provided that you do X, Y, and Z to them, because they want the price to be paid by political capital coming from the US, and so on. So we have reached a situation whereby it's not a question only of talking to the public. And as you well know, after the 7th of October, the word peace process that has become a negative word in the Arab world became also a negative word in Israel, or a negative term in Israel. So now we have an uphill battle, and it's a battle of wills. And what is happening, or what has happened in New York, is also a reflection of the world being divided into two. On one side, there is Israel and the United States, and the other side is the rest of the international community, coming up with this communique that, as you said, is quite important and lists all the difficulties and all the criteria for resolving these difficulties in accordance with international law. So they're not coming with something that no one heard before. No, it is exactly what we have been talking about since Madrid, and not that much has changed. So this is why, I have my doubts that the question is a question of if Arab leaders talk to the Israeli public, then they will change their mind. With all what they have been saying and doing, listening to your extremist members of the government, your establishment that is advocating for all kinds of things, and blaming the rest of the world on everything. So people are starving in Gaza. Israel comes out and says, no, this is not our problem. This is the UN that is responsible. This is Hamas that is stealing. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is excellent, while the whole world has been saying that we will not deal with this institution because it is acting in a manner that is inconsistent with international law, and so on. So I think the challenge that we have is much bigger than this, and that Israel now is in a zone of strategic miscalculation, and I hope that they get out of it, whether through elections or in whatever way, but I don't think that you will be able to do that in a different way. But let me go to Lebanon, because...
No. You cannot make all these statements and not expect me to respond.
Oh, I do expect you not to respond, because if we do...
Well, I'm gonna disappoint you.
Then we will not be dealing with all kinds of other issues. But please,
that's fine with me. That's fine by me. I think the discussion is serious enough and important enough. The issue is very grave, and yet it is fun to disagree with you.
Sure, by all means.
There was so much that you said that I disagree with. For example, just on factual issues, the memo that came out of New York went long beyond anything that we knew previously from the Arab world. For example, it's the first time that I saw all these countries endorsing coming to Gaza with troops on the ground, with boots on the ground. Israelis should hear that. And there are other issues, but let me come to the more important issue that you raised. You raised a much more important issue. And here I disagree with you when you equate the Israeli government.
I respond to this first, and then you continue, because this was a decision that was adopted by the Arab Summit, because they said they're willing to send troops in the context of a Security Council resolution, and this is exactly what came out of the UN declaration as well. Continue. Go ahead.
You equate Israel with the Israeli government. And I must say that I was really relieved when I saw the Saudi Crown Prince and Foreign Minister and other Arab leaders making a clear distinction between the awful government that we have and the people of Israel, of which I'm very proud. It is no accident that since the elections of 2020, of late 22, Israelis woke up to the nature of this government. It is no accident that 82% of the public oppose the government policy in Gaza. 82% oppose the government policy in Gaza. 75% want this government to go. An overwhelming majority disagrees with just about every policy of the government. Now, I'm not saying that you were wrong. You were right in saying that positions hardened on the Palestinian state issue after October 7th. That is correct. And yes, we have an uphill battle, but we have plenty to work with. I will even grant you that the next government that I think will be very different, very different, will not be, with me, it's not just a hope, it's analysis. My analysis suggests that it's going to be very different. I may be wrong and things might change. But what I'm trying to say that even if the next government is very different, and even if it will change course on the Palestinian issue, on many issues, 180 degrees, end the war in Gaza, get out of Gaza, open Gaza for a regional international reconstruction, governance, and security, a change policy on the West Bank, stop Jewish terrorism, start dealing with the Palestinian Authority as a partner rather than as an adversary. Even if that is all likely to happen, and I believe it is, it's not going to be a bunch of peaceniks who will run to Ramallah to hug Abu Mazen and sign a peace treaty. So yes, we have an uphill battle, but in order to get there, we need to energize the Israeli public on the Palestinian issue as well. And for that to happen, Arab leaders hold the key, because nobody can convince Israelis of the regional opportunity and what Israel should do in order to get that opportunity. Nobody can convince us of that better than the Arab leaders who can make it happen. So I'm not saying that the Arab leaders talking to Israelis will solve all our problems. I'm just asking, why not?
Nimrod, I hope you're right, but I don't think you are, because the Arab leaders, the whole world, the public opinion in Israel has been putting pressure on this government to end the war for many months. And what we're seeing is procrastination, avoiding making, sending out. So we can talk as much as we wish, and the public opinion in Israel can do whatever it wishes, but at the end of the day, we have people in control that are refusing any steps that make sense or that is beneficial, even from an Israeli perspective. That's my problem.
How lucky you and I were that President Sadat did not think like you. That President Sadat saw a majority Israelis opposed to peace with Egypt, came to Jerusalem and changed it overnight. I think Arab leaders can create a Sadat moment remotely without going to Jerusalem, just by inviting an Israeli TV crew to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Cairo and Amman.
I don't share your optimism. I think the situation in public opinion in Israel has a long way to go. Let me ask you about, we will have to reduce some of the issues that we were hoping to talk about if we don't have time, but let me ask you about Lebanon, because Lebanon is an interesting case as well. Israel and Lebanon were able to agree through the United States on maritime borders. And as you well know, this could not have happened without the approval of Hezbollah. So it is an indication that there are people, even that are considered the most extreme by all kinds of forces in the world, who are willing to make compromises and reach agreements. Now, as a result of what happened in the war between Israel and Lebanon, the attacks on Hezbollah, the killing of many of its leaders, the pagers, all kinds of things, and then we reached a ceasefire. The ceasefire agreement was reached, but then Israel decided not to withdraw. And then they continue to ask for freedom of action inside Lebanon. So they are still there. They want freedom of action. And in a similar situation like the one with Hamas, they want to impose surrender terms, despite the fact that they are not the ones who totally won a war. So do you think that this is a recipe that can achieve any progress in relations between Lebanon and Israel, while as a result of what happened in Syria, there could have been an opening to reach an agreement on border demarcation, just like with the help of the US, just like they reached a maritime agreement with the help of the United States?
My answer is yes, I believe it is possible, but I got to put it in context. I think you have to factor, and I think it's difficult, but nonetheless, you have to factor October 7th into the Israeli psyche. We went through a trauma that we will not go out of for a very long time. And different people reach different conclusions, but one conclusion that all agree upon is that we can no longer take threats emerging along our borders as theoretical. There's something we can live with and wait to see if it happens or not. That was the mistake for more than a decade in Gaza, the strategy of the current prime minister of feeding the beast of Hamas until it exploded in our faces. Israel is now overcompensating, in my judgment. And I think that the five positions that the IDF maintains inside Lebanese territory, as well as sectors of Syria adjacent to the Golan Heights that we are occupying since the Assad regime collapsed, is overcompensating, basically telling ourselves we're not going to have another October 7th coming from Lebanon or from Syria. In my judgment, we are overcompensating. But nonetheless, I believe that the forces in Lebanon, and thank God that neither Syria nor Lebanon are part of the promised land. So even the lunatics in our cabinet do not insist that we have to occupy them because it is part of God's promise to us, which is what they claim about Gaza and the West Bank. So at least on Lebanon and Syria, we can conduct a rational rather than theocratic policy. And the rabbis don't call the shots, but rather the strategists. I think we are overcompensating. I understand why, but I believe that the room for understandings is there.
I didn't know that Gaza was part of the promised land, because I thought that there were Israeli leaders who wanted Gaza to fall into the sea. So I'm surprised. But anyway, if we go to
they
Syria,
were not observant.
They were not observant. Okay. If we go to Syria, I don't think that Syria imposes any threat on Israel at this point in time, and Israel knows that. But then they feel that this is something that they can do, so they just do it. So we can attack Syria, we can attack Damascus without even having any justification to attack Damascus, but we can. So why don't we attack Damascus? And it helps the prime minister in relation to his standing and in relation to the internal situation, his popularity, whatever it is. I can attack Lebanon, I can attack Syria, I can attack Gaza, the West Bank, you name it, Yemen, Iran, So all this can take place, regardless of whether there is a threat or not. And since there is an automatic support coming from the United States, so this makes things much easier. Isn't this the case?
I think, Hesham, when trying to understand threat perception of someone else, we have to be humble.
I agree.
We have to assume that we don't really fully understand the other guy. And we can sit in our living room and say, why is he afraid? He's so powerful. Sit down with him and he will explain to you why he is afraid.
Because
we never understood why Iran was afraid of Israel, because we had no aspirations vis-a-vis Iran, and yet they were, and so on. So when it comes to Syria, when the regime collapsed, and Israelis didn't know whether they are dealing with Mr. Ashara or with Al-Julani, and the distinction is clear because Israelis are still zigging and zagging between viewing him as a jihadist in suit, and others will say no. He is what he pretends to be. Give him a chance and even help him. Between these two schools, when he first took over, or when his jihadi movement took over Damascus, nobody knew where they're headed and whether there is or isn't a threat to Israel. So Israel took precautions, which I thought were justified. But the problem with the current Israeli government is not that it overcompensates for October 7th. I understand that. But that it has only one of two legs. It limps on the military leg and it lacks the diplomatic one. And what is necessary is for this government to accept the need for diplomacy to complement military power in order to translate military success into strategic, stable reality. This is not the case. And let me just make one suggestion. I think what is missing here is an adult in the room. Look at Syria, which you just brought up correctly. Here you have the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Emiratis, and even the Americans working to stabilize Syria and steer its government in a direction of inclusiveness at home and minimum friction abroad. Wonderful. And here is Israel working at cross purposes because it is focused exclusively on security, including that strike in Damascus that you mentioned.
Sure.
I think what is missing is for the Trump administration to create the diplomatic equivalent to CENTCOM. What CENTCOM succeeded in doing on security in the region is lacking in diplomacy. Somebody has to convene all the like-minded in order to see how to harmonize legitimate Israeli security needs with the interest of the others who are working to shape Syria in a peaceful direction.
That's a tall order, because the question is a question of getting something reasonable from Israel in as far as how they look at their security. Yes, you're right. We shouldn't be doing that from our sofas in our living rooms. But then there are limits as to what is possible and what is not possible.
How do you know what the limits are before you try?
Well,
why is this passivity?
No notion of what it thinks is a threat to Israel or not. And part of that also is related to Iran. After all, what happened in the attack on Iran, so whether it's from Israel or the United States, all what we're hearing now is beating the drums of war again and again, saying that if Iran, although we don't have an agreement of a ceasefire that says if Iran did such and such a step, then this would be a violation of the ceasefire. We don't have that. But then it is up to Israel to say, well, this is a violation and Iran has to be attacked. So So this is why it is left up to the whims of a leadership that has calculations, that has nothing to do with the national interest, but has everything to do with political calculations related to elections and the internal situation in Israel. And that is the problem. And
I rest my case. I rest my case.
Okay, I'm glad
without an adult in the room that brings the parties together, we're going to have more of the violence solution rather than diplomatic ones. And I must say, as a veteran diplomat that you are, one of the most experienced around, I don't understand why you dismiss diplomacy as something that cannot produce a result that is not anticipated from the outset.
No, never. I would never dispute this diplomacy, because this has been my job for the last 40 years to work on diplomatic solutions. But
then join me in preaching diplomacy for Israel, Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Israel, Iran.
But then, as you said, Nimrod, we have to have an adult in the room, and currently we are lacking in some quarters this adult in the room. Let me go to a final point. The final point is about the normalization and the prospects of change in relation to relations between Israel and the region, and in particular Egypt and Jordan. I think you will agree with me that this relations between Israel and the countries of the region in general, those that have relations with Israel, in particular Egypt and Jordan, is at its worst since the signing of the agreements, whether it's the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, the Jordanian, even the Abraham Accords. So they have gone to the worst situation ever. And then you hear Witkoff saying that before the end of the year, he expects that perhaps 6 to 10 countries would join the Abraham Accords. Do you think that this is a reasonable expectation?
First, I agree with your characterization of what's going on. I think my government, in its recklessness, has driven relations with Egypt, Jordan, and even the Emiratis to a very difficult point. And I'm afraid that were we not entering a 3 months Knesset recess, the lunatics might have made good on their promise, to me, threat of annexing portions of the West Bank outright, in the wake of which not just there will be no normalization, there will be no peace with Egypt, Jordan, or anybody else. So thank God that we are in a 3 months Knesset recess. No, I don't think that Witkoff's prediction is realistic. I think that there will be no expansion. There will be no expansion of normalization, absent something serious on the Israeli-Palestinian file. Serious. Now, the current formula that what the Saudis expect of Israel in order for that to happen says a irreversible, credible, time-bound path toward the two-state solution. Now, I'm not sure what is irreversible in international relations, but I can't see what credible steps Israel could take. They're not going to come from this government. And therefore, before we have elections in Israel, and before Jerusalem changes course, a sea change course in our attitude on the Palestinian issue, it's not only that normalization will remain over the horizon, but I fear for the existing peaceful relations.
Well, I'm glad you ended on this point, because I think that this is something that we can agree on. But I really hope that there is a change in Israel that would allow all kinds of things to happen. Whether it's
but you're not willing to contribute to making it happen.
No, absolutely. You know that I've been working on this issue for decades. So
no. My concrete suggestion.
Your concrete suggestion, well, at the end of the day, leaders have their own political calculations. And I have my doubts that leaders now are willing to do something perhaps they can prepare once there is a change in Israel.
If there is a change, we don't need them.
No,
we need them to create the change.
You will always need them for whether it's.
Well, I'm exaggerating.
Yes, I agree with you that maybe I think the Israelis have to take matters into their own hand. It is not.
Why not help? I can't understand why not help.
No, absolutely. You know that we try to help on all kinds of occasions, but
well, you bumped into my obsession, so I'm sorry.
But not only that, I think also, just like you have a problem in Israel as a result of the 7th of October, there is a problem in the Arab world in relation to what happened in Gaza. So there are all kinds of difficulties and calculations in relation to any step that is taken by any Arab country towards Israel. And it has to be calculated in a manner that is quite difficult, because the sentiments in the region, despite the fact that the region is much more quiet than it should be, and many capitals and cities around the world are much more active on the situation in Gaza than in our part of the world, yet the sentiment is very clear. And leaders are very clear in their calculations as to what they can do and what they can't do in relation to gestures or communication with Israel. Nimrod, thank you for having this discussion. I hope that we can have a similar discussion, maybe a little over a year from now, and see how the situation evolved, whether it's in relation to Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, the prospects of peace, and who knows, maybe things would look much brighter when we reach that point. I would like to ask all our viewers, after thanking
Before you do, I want to thank you. It is always a joy to be challenged by an intellectual of your caliber.
Thank you, Nimrod. It's a pleasure to talk to you and to hear your views as well, that we always agree on all kinds of things and disagree on others, but such is life. And I would like to thank all our listeners for staying with us and listening to this discussion, and hope that they will join the next episode for August on the same platforms. Thank you and goodbye.